Welcome to the QP Diaries podcast. This podcast is all about inspiring and empowering the next generation of QP professionals and future quality assurance leaders in the UK pharmaceutical industry. On every episode, I'll be speaking to QPs from across the industry, and our listeners will have the opportunity to hear their stories, their expertise, and we'll be discussing topics to foster growth and learning to help you develop your career as a qualified person. If you're passionate about quality assurance and want to learn from some of the very best QPs and thought leaders from across the industry, then this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Dal Pawar, the founder of Assure Bio, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Yeah, well, I suppose to get us started, this is all about, inspiring QPs of the next generation, and really keen to hear your personal story and to share your expertise. So I suppose for those who don't know you, can you share an overview of your career journey as a QA and QP professional, please?
Yeah, crikey. How long have we got? I guess it all started around about 1985. That's when I got my first proper job working in a laboratory. It wasn't a pharmaceutical laboratory. It was fine chemicals, so lots of serious chemicals that could do you injury. And it was for the circuit board industry. Now, the good thing about that was there were a lot of guys who, very good chemists, chemists that had learned their trade and also had good theoretical background. So not only did I learn about how to conduct myself in a laboratory, I also learned a lot about the laboratory basics and also critical thinking and working your way through problems. So it really helped me set the platform for what was going to come next. I worked there for about 10 years, and it was, I guess you get to a point in any career, and I know these days people move around a lot more, but in those days it wasn't really something that you did. So after 10 years, I thought, I need to do something different now. And the job came up in the north of England, in another laboratory, but it was a pharmaceutical laboratory in a company that made liquids. And I thought, well, how different can it be? It's a laboratory and all the rest of it. Well, when I arrived, and maybe other people would know this experience, the way that pharmaceutical companies worked was way different to anybody else. And I suddenly found myself having to pick up lots of new learning, and the difficulty was not just for me, but for the staff that reported to me. I was also learning to lead a small team of laboratory chemists who actually knew a lot more about pharmaceutical chemistry than I did. So that was a challenge for them and me, and I certainly felt the weight of the responsibility there. And one of the things that I'll touch upon later is about this thing called leadership that we see a lot of things about on LinkedIn, and I have some strong opinions about leadership and how that should be. The reason being is because at that point I hadn't had any real training, mentoring on how to lead a team, and consequently I made a number of mistakes, and luckily for me, the people who I worked with were understanding of that. And I think at that stage in my career, I was ready to learn from them, not just from a pharmaceutical point of view, but from a human being to human being point of view. My career there lasted some 15 years, and the company was small when I started, and as the company grew and departments got bigger and more disciplines were in place, so I managed to move around the company and do different jobs. That led me into R&D, which was a really formative and important part of my career, because as opposed to quality control, I was now working with people who had a more deep understanding of the chemistry of things. And also they worked on different timescales. We weren't working on a 1 day or 2 day turnaround for products. We were looking at 12 months or so to get a product from the drawing board into license. So I learned so much from those guys, and the broader spectrum was that I also had to do supporting of license applications through the new product introduction. So I learned more and more things off more and more people. And the fantastic thing there is people were prepared to give me the time to understand it. So when the company finally said to me, we think you would make a good QP, I said yes, I'm sure. So I had a lot of respect for the QP that worked in our facility. It was he was a very personal. He is a very personable chap. Proper northern speaking, straightforward. Explains things in good detail, but explains it in a very succinct and assertive manner. I learnt a lot from him in that respect. And then I started the QP journey. It probably took 2.5 years, I would say, to do that. And that was another very important step in the learning, because what you do there is you meet other people from different industries and different experiences, and you form lifelong friendships with those people. There are people that are out there now who I talk to on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, and sometimes once a year. The key thing and the key message in that is that as QPs, we don't know everything, and in fact, we're not expected to know everything. What we're expected to do as part of the code of conduct is form meaningful relationships. That's what they call it. But what you're doing there is you're acknowledging the experience and expertise of others, and you've got to use that. You cannot guess at what the decision needs to be if you don't know. And any people that are thinking of becoming a QP, that's one of the messages I would give to them. You can't know everything, and that point is more poignant today as the we'll probably have to stop there. Let me just go back now.
Okay.
So the one of the most important things that you learn when you're going through your training is the development of those relationships with those people. And it's becoming more important as the legislation gets bigger and the Orange Guide gets fatter. So we must adapt to those situations. And you have to talk to people who have the relevant experience in those areas to help you. And that means that you're not alone as a QP, because believe it not, that as a QP you can feel alone sometimes when you're working in that environment. Anyway, I was supported very well. I became a QP at first go. The Viva didn't go that well, but I was talked through it by the guys, and the errors that I made we discussed those, and I took all of that on board. And it's advice that I've kept in mind ever since. And I think once you've taken a Viva, you'll remember it. And it's an experience that you must go through in order to prove to yourself as much as anything that you've got this, and you'll be able to do it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get back to the leadership later.
Yeah.
Of course, now. Sorry, now go on.
Sorry, and when did you qualify as a QP?
It was 2006. So
2006. Okay.
Yeah. So I guess I was a late developer, but then I had spent 10 years in a laboratory before I got to the pharmaceutical industry. So that was the case. So yeah, 2006, and of course, a bit like driving, it's only after that you pass your Viva that you start learning to be a QP. Because the day after you qualify as a QP, people will start to treat you differently. People will see you as a point of contact, a point of knowledge, and suddenly you can be in the spotlight from anybody from the production operator all the way up to the MD. And that changes practically overnight, and it's something you need to be prepared for. Anyway, eventually, after a long career there, I left. I'd done everything that I could do at that facility, and I left, and then started my career proper, if you like, in the outside world. of the safe place that I was in different dosage forms. There was a lot to be learnt there, and one of the things I learnt is that not everybody thinks the same way as the QP or as you do, and sometimes you have to be more assertive than you think you do in order to get things done in the way that you want to. And I guess that brings to mind the saying, I think it was Janet Street Porter that said that 33% of the people will like you, 33% of the people you can get to like you, and 33% of the people you will never like and they will never like you. I'm not sure what happened to the other 1%, but that tends to be the mantra that I live by. It isn't a popularity competition, and there will be people out there who understand what I'm saying there. But there are plenty of people who you will get on with, but there are some you won't. They're not all good guys, but you learn to spot those and work with them as much as you can. So now I'm contracting. I get the ability to meet lots of different people. I've met some fantastic people along the way so far, particularly in situations where they find themselves in a difficult position with the MHRA. So where the company is in difficulties and perhaps in IAG or compliance management team. It amazes me how positive people can be in those circumstances, and I've met a lot of people who can make a difference in whatever organisation they work with, and it always inspires me to keep going and do better. But the great thing is that I'm also, because I'm older now, I guess I'm looked upon as somebody who can provide training, which I really enjoy doing. I do quite a bit of that. I've worked for the RSSL organisation. Moreover, recently it's been in companies where they know that I've worked in that environment and they want me to do bespoke training for them, which is great. Of course, doing all the things that you're doing, you're getting exposed to a variety of QP situations and scenarios, and that requires you to keep thinking. One of the things it does, it keeps the mind going and makes sure that you're on the ball. I think one of the challenges on the back of that is all the changes in legislation that have gone on over a period of time, and certainly in the past few years. And we see we're having to keep up with ever-changing landscape of the background, which makes things even more of a challenge. As I said, I did remediation work. That was very rewarding, but very tiring. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. And where it's not successful, it tends to be not anything really to do with the efforts of the quality team, but moreover the quality culture, which of course is coming more to the fore these days. And that's something that I always keep in store. The company won't change unless the senior management is on board and they're working with you. And the flip side of that challenge is, as quality people, we have to explain to people who are not quality people what it's all for and why you're doing it. And that's to keep the company agile, that's to save money, that's to make sure that the company can grow. And we don't always get that across to people. And there was a fantastic article in one of the NSF journals. I even remember the number. It was number 40, I think, and it had an article in there that talked about why companies fail, and it was really good. I'd recommend people look that up because if you want to try and explain to the senior management what quality is about, it's all encompassed in that document. Really good. The other thing I got into, I started to do responsible person work on the distribution side, and also more recently RPI work. So a variety of things, all wrapped up to give me a broad spectrum these days. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully, you didn't ramble on too much. But
No, it was a very in-depth overview of your career, Kevin. This is exactly what I want to hear anyway, in terms of where you started, your journey, and to where you are right now, and the experiences that you've had. So I think just to dig a bit deeper on that, because the QP Diaries is a platform for learning and development and to help the next generation. So can you highlight some or a significant milestone in your career or key learnings which you believe has shaped you in as a quality assurance professional?
yeah, I think what when I talked about working in R&D, so one of the things about working in R&D is that two things really. One is the way that people think in R&D is very different. It's more in depth. It has a deeper understanding of what's going on. But people have different priorities and timescales. And up until that point, I hadn't really experienced that exposure to the thinking that R&D people do. And I'm not trying to pigeonhole them. They're fantastic people, and the guys that I work with were absolutely brilliant to a man and woman. But it taught me patience. It taught me to be comfortable with scenarios that will take longer. It taught me good project management, which project management is something that would be excellent for a QP to look at. If you want to talk about putting together a continuous or a quality improvement plan at a facility, you need to understand how all the different strands of that quality improvement plan might fit together, how to resource it, what backing is needed, how to make it move forward, and the disciplines involved. Fabulous grounding for me to pick up those things, and I use that regularly when I go into facilities today. One of the things that recently I started to do was, if I'm going to take up a new contract as a QP, I would start with a 2-day GMP audit, and that gives everybody a clear view on where there may be gaps. Sometimes there aren't, sometimes there are, and then I'd talk about the tools they might use, all coming from that R&D background. And I think the other thing that is almost always missed about choosing a QP or a prospective QP is that of communication. So when I first started working, my first job was to inspect the cleanliness of mixing vessels. And I had to go around as a 23-year-old youngster to explain to guys who were probably 20 years older than me and had been doing the job longer than I had, much longer than I had, that they'd perhaps missed cleaning something, or they perhaps hadn't done something properly. And when you first come up against that, that's something that you have to learn how to do properly, because you want the guys on your side and you want them to work with you. And how I learned to do that was with good grace and good humour. I try to keep humour involved in the workplace as much as possible. Working in the pharma industry is hard work enough, so a bit of humour goes a long way. And working with those guys way back then, they worked on what you would anecdotally call the shop floor. It helps me to communicate with everybody in an organisation. And as you'll know, you have to talk to the guys on the shop floor in a different way that you might talk to the CEO. It's something that you develop over time, and not many people teach it. And quite often in this country, it's something that is one of my hobby horses, really, is that we often promote people into managerial roles or supervisory roles without giving them any tools whatsoever to manage in that environment. If you're very good at working a HPLC or a piece of analytical equipment, it's fairly easy once you've learned to do it, because it will do what it's told every time. Whereas a human being doesn't. There are many, many factors which may affect how a human being functions. And that's something that is poorly understood and taught by management. And this is why, I think, my personal opinion is why when you look at all these posts on LinkedIn where it talks about good leadership. Now, the thing about good leadership and the articles that I see, a lot of the articles are very idealistic. They talk about what it is to be a perfect leader and what it is to be, doing all these wonderful things for all people. The reality is somewhat different. There is a combination of leadership and management that is required. At the end of the day, the workplace is not so much a democracy. If it was, you wouldn't get anywhere. So at some point, people have got to work within a managerial structure as well as the leadership structure. It's very easy to criticise new managers and people who get into place, but if they haven't had the help and the mentoring to get them there, it's a difficult job, and not everybody really understands that. Until you've walked a mile in those shoes, it's very easy to criticise from outside. And sometimes I look on LinkedIn at these lovely articles and I think, well, have you actually done any leadership? It's all very well talking about it, but have you walked the walk? Maybe I talk out of turn, but that's my view on those things. What I also see it is that if a company is, and this is a message for senior management who would look within their company to put a person through the QP training, remember that being a QP is not just about the technical knowledge. It's also a large part of it is about communication and getting across the key points effectively to get things done. And I think people who send people on QP courses do not consider that nearly enough. In another of my roles, I do see a lot of prospective QPs come through, and sadly, one or two of them will struggle to make the grade because they are what you might call pure scientists. And I say that advisedly because I am a scientist, and sometimes communication is more difficult. It might be on too detailed a level, or it may not be too much may be assumed in the understanding of the detail. So for CEOs and people like that, they have to consider, if they want a successful QP candidate to get sailed through the process, they need to be good communicators as well as good scientists, and that's very important.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things there, Kev, in terms of your, I suppose, transition from being a QP then into leadership, and effectively how important communication is and the style of communication. But I suppose in regards to that, in terms of collaboration within departments, within businesses, managing up, managing down, how important is that?
I think so. So if you want to be successful within the workplace, I'll talk about managing upwards in a minute, but with the guys who do the job, what I see far too often is that QA are far too overbearing in the approach, and by that I mean if something needs to be improved or an SOP needs to be changed, you find that the QA people take over and start writing it themselves, and then they push the SOP through the system out into use. And then the people who actually use the SOP, a number of things happen. First of all, the SOP doesn't accurately reflect what they actually do. They've got no input into the process, so no buy-in. And as a consequence of that, you get more error and problem, and credibility is lost in the use of standard procedures and, in fact, QA. And I've had examples of that in the last two contract roles that I've gone into. And when you speak to the people who are involved, they're really good people. I always say to QA staff particularly, the people who come to work here don't get up in the morning and think, today I'm going to go to work and I'm going to do a bad job. Nobody thinks that when they get up in the morning, so why should we assume that that's what's happened? That and poor root cause analysis and thinking. I encourage people at the symposium earlier this year. One of the speakers, I forget who it was talked about a book called Fast and Slow Thinking, I think it was. And in there is an absolute goldmine on how people don't think, or they think in a way that is more from a gut instinct than collecting information. And if you want to know or get some insight into why root cause is so poorly done, the beginning of that book will give you some information on that front. The other thing that I found is that you've got to rely on other people. And by that I mean some individuals, they may not have the skill, the specific skill. So I'll give an example. We needed to, going back a few years, we were installing a new HPLC setup. It was a big investment, probably I think it was about 10 new HPLCs, a network system and all the rest of it. And we hadn't got expertise in CSV. We'd got somebody who was a consultant, but they didn't know the HPLC setup well enough. Now, one of the guys that worked for me was very keen, very knowledgeable, and he was like a sponge. And I said to him one day, I says, this is what we're up against. I'm not really sure where we go with this. And he said, well, I'll give it a go. I'll have a look at it. And I thought, well, okay, in the face of this, I think enthusiasm is 50% of the job. So I'll let the guy get on with it. And I didn't micromanage him. I let him do the research. Gave him some timescales because obviously you have to do that. And he made an absolute fantastic job of it. And the example there, the learning there, is that sometimes if you identify the right person, your life is made much easier as a manager, because individuals really, really want to do it. And the guy went on to be an expert in that field and a go-to person. And it also gave him a sense of well-being. I think before that, because he wasn't being stimulated and because he wasn't doing what he felt he was good at, he was not in a great place, and he was thinking of leaving the organisation. And but that was a glimmer of hope. And once that was done, he stayed, and as I understand it, he's probably still there. So really, the empowering others and getting other people to do it. Again, I know we see this on LinkedIn, but it's also not always easy. You have to be the right mindset yourself, and the individual that you're talking to has to be the right mindset. Another example was a guy who was a fantastic R&D person, knew lots and lots of stuff. Also, importantly, he could convey that to other people. His knowledge, he could talk to people and get them to understand it. But he was a fairly quiet guy. I wanted him to supervise or to take the next step up, because I thought he would be good at it. But he was really reticent to do it. So I said to him, we sat down together. I said to him, look, let's try it this way. I said, you have a go at it. We'll do it for 6 months, and I will support you 100%. And if it goes wrong, it's my responsibility. It's not your responsibility. We'll get some feedback from the team. We'll have a look at the things that go well and the things that might not go well, because they're people. Stuff will occasionally go wrong, and see what you think of it. And if after 6 months you don't like it, or it's not for you, then we'll draw a line under it and we'll go back to normal. And he said, all right, yeah. So long as he was concerned that he was going to mess it up. because I said to him that I would underwrite that and it would be my responsibility. He trusted me to do that. He made a fantastic job of it. He loved it. He loved the fact that people came to him for help. He was a completely different manager to the other managers in the team, and complemented the management team really well, and also complemented me, who was leading the team. So his way of thinking rubbed off on me too, so I could actually see how he was doing things and pick up learnings from him. He went on to be a senior manager at another organisation. Did very well for himself. I think he's retired now. He retired early, but he was a person who I guess I was most proud of as a manager of people. So collaboration is so important, so important.
Yeah, so collaborating within teams, within departments, and I suppose giving people the opportunity by empowering them and pushing them outside their comfort zone to see actually you can do this, you can flourish in different roles, which they thought they couldn't.
Yeah, and I guess from I guess from a quality perspective, it's easy to become the policeman and build an ivory tower. And the last 3 organisations I worked in, when I went to join them as a contractor, that in some part that was where they were, and that had to be dismantled. But again, management by walking the floor. It's another saying, but it's true. You go out and talk to people. You go out and talk to them what's important to them. I work with a guy who was a massive Rotherham United fan. He can't help that. That's where he came from. But we used to have a conversation about how Rotherham had done at the weekend. I, for my sins, supported Coventry, and so we were sort of kindred spirits down in the dumps on a fairly regular basis about how our team had performed. And we know each other. We kept in touch afterwards, and he's a lovely guy. But he worked in a different team. Because we'd formed that relationship, it was possible for him to come to me when he needed help, and when I needed help, I could go to him. And it's not about trying to prove that you know everything in life. It's about knowing that you don't know everything, and other people can help you understand things better. Trying to remember the saying my father taught me, which was, if show me a man who knows everything, and I'll show you a fool. It sits with me. It resonates with me how that works.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that, I mean, especially as a contractor, you've walked into different organisations, potentially who may be in a bit of trouble. So you have to go in there and obviously help them and consult them. So managing upwards, that communication style, how very different is that compared to leading a team?
Yeah, I think when you manage upwards, and I'm the first one to say that when it comes to senior management, I guess I'm less tolerant as a QP or a contractor than I perhaps should be. I've tried to evaluate at times why that would be. I tend to I've had to try and work on different ways in which to approach certain scenarios, because my default setting is to listen, understand, and then if I think the person is not genuine or doesn't have the best interest at heart, then I tend to be they tend to know that fairly quickly, and that's something that I need to think about. The thing is, though, is that one of the first jobs is to get them to understand why it's important, and that again has been on LinkedIn recently quite a bit, and I think that's a very important and valuable discussion to get into. Most senior managers, they're very senior people. They don't want detail. and as scientists, that's a challenge for us because we like detail. We like to give detail. So if you're a QP and you're communicating with senior management, you have to cut it down. You have to get the salient points together, and you have to communicate in bite-sized chunks that is easy to understand. They don't have time. They're not just managing quality. They're managing a vast organisation in some cases, and what they need is a way forward, not another problem erected for them to think through. And I guess that's the thing is that you should go with the solution, not the problem, and that makes gives the senior management a little bit of an easier time when it comes to deciding what to do. I guess the other side of dealing with senior management is they are the ones that make the decisions, and in very rare occasions, you know that they're going to make the decision that's not good for the organisation. And that's when you have to be assertive, and you have to be very clear about what needs to be done. And to any young people out there who are wanting to be a QP, this is one of the hard parts of being a QP. Sometimes you have to deliver bad news or bad news from a commercial perspective, and you have to learn different ways in which to do that, but at the same time be assertive to make sure that the point gets across properly, and be prepared for the intense discussion that goes with it. It's part of the job in some circumstances. So that's important.
Yeah, I suppose that brings you back to the point where you mentioned earlier in terms of no one really teaches you how to communicate when you're going through the training to become a QP. However, it's a huge part of that job.
Yeah, it's something that I've considered. I've not really had the time to look at yet. Hopefully, at some stage, I will. But communication should be part of, I think, the curriculum, and managing in those scenarios. As I said very early in the conversation, you suddenly go from being Joe Bloggs, who is sauntering along doing your job, to somebody who's in the spotlight, and people look straight to you to make decisions, proper decisions, the right decision, and they expect you to know the answers to everything. Don't be tempted to try and know the answer to everything.
So I suppose in retrospect then, what guidance would you offer to a younger Kev starting out his journey in quality assurance, and in particular, I suppose, going for the QP training?
Wow, crikey! I think that's a good question. What would you say to yourself? Well, I think I've covered most of it already in the discussion. Don't pretend you know the answer. It's okay to not know what the answer is, and I guess that's the same in management as well. You'll feel in the spotlight. You'll feel like everybody's watching you. You'll feel like everybody's judging you. All of these things. Most of it will be in your head. Most of it will be in your head and not actually be the reality. So you need to talk to people. You need to get out there and do the communication. You of course have got to put the hard yards in. You've got to learn. There is a commitment for new people to come through, and it's a bigger commitment than I went through because the legislation is much bigger. The complexity is there, and the changes that are going on are quite staggering at times. I think, as far as possible, with procedures and processes, people have to simplify and that comes from talking to the people that you're working with. I would say, be less important, be more humble when it comes to learning stuff and being with people. I probably would have said to myself, you need to study harder at university instead of having a great time. It was the 80s, of course, and the music was fabulous. there were lots of other distractions in those days, but that would be something that you could probably say to yourself, you get something out of it when you put something into it. And over the past, 15 years or so, when I've done various lecturing and on various subjects with students and what have you, I'm always asked what do I need to do to be a QP, and it's hard work. That's what you need. You need hard work, dedication, and the thing that you shouldn't go into it for, although the rewards can be good, is not just for the money, because it's not just for the money, it's for the patient at the end of the day. And you need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose the last bit of information I'd give my former self is do it because it's been fabulous, absolutely fabulous. I can look back on my career. Yes, there's been ups and downs, and there are people that I've come across who I haven't got on with. But overall, I'm really satisfied and pleased and proud of where I've got to. And I suppose it's worth saying as well that how I feel is built on by the knowledge and care of others to get me to where I am now.
Brilliant, Kev. Yeah, no, it sounds like the hard work has paid off for yourself, and it's been extremely rewarding over the years. And for my final question.
Like it.
Sorry there. So my final question, Kev, is you touched upon it a few times, is in terms of, I suppose, the fast changing legislations, regulations within the industry, and there's a lot to keep on top of. So how do you see the role of a QP evolving in the coming years?
I think to start with, the QP as it stands at the moment. So if you look at the study guide at the moment for a QP, it's broad. It has to be. Once you've passed the Viva, you're expected to slot into any scenario to be able to function as a QP. But things are changing. The manufacturing base in this country has decreased. So if QPs want to get experience in different parts of manufacturing, and it's an absolute must, you must get that, then people are going to have to work harder to get through that, and to get enough experience to be able to manage in those situations. Obviously, medicines are changing. We're moving to preventative medicines and the biologics and all of the innovations that are coming through, which require different knowledge and disciplines. Colleague of mine was at the very forefront of that some years ago. It is now massively in demand because there aren't so many people around with her knowledge. And I think the scientific disciplines that people will need will probably change somewhat too. QPs may become more specialised. Currently a QP is expected to be able to move from one place to another to be able to deal with different scenarios. That might change, and there may be a need to have specific QP types for certain things. Obviously, you talked about legislation. The Orange Guide is a recipe for back pain problems if you carry it around these days. It's a much bigger tome than it ever used to be. I think also the good thing from a QP's perspective is the inspectorate are starting to look to the most senior management in an organisation, looking at the quality culture and how developed the quality culture is, and I think that's long overdue. The QP is expected to be all things to all people, but the one thing that it's very difficult to do from the QP's role is completely influence the company in what needs to be done from a quality perspective. It has to come from the people at the top. I think the the thing about being more specialised, I don't think that will come anytime soon. One of the difficulties that we face, of course, is that the QP getting new QPs into the industry is still a challenge. The pass rate currently is around 50% in Viva. I may make a couple of points about that's worth, if people are going through that process, it will help. I think people have to remember that, yes, you have to know the legislation, and that's a challenge, as I mentioned earlier. Yes, you have to know about each different discipline within the study guide, but the biggest one of all is that the fact that you may know all of that stuff, you've still got to be able to coherently present it when you're given a scenario to deal with. It's no good if you're the most knowledgeable person in the world, but then cannot bring that knowledge to bear to manage and control a situation which may be serious for the patient. So from the perspective of all of those three things, you have to remember that if you have all the knowledge in the world and you know all the legislation in the world, it will not work if you cannot pull it together into a coherent strategy to manage a scenario and a situation. If you're unable to do all of those three things, or one of those three things, it is difficult for you to go through the Viva process. And of course, that's what you'll need to do in real life. So that going through those three steps is very important and key to getting success.
Brilliant. No, thanks for sharing that, Kevin. You've been an absolute fantastic guest on the QP Diaries. You've covered quite a lot there, which is good, which is what I like. A lot about professional growth, leadership, your experience, your stories as a budding QP in the past, and yeah, just at the end there, touching upon the advice for anyone sitting there Viva or wants to sort of go through that process. Yeah, so thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. If any of our listeners want to contact you regarding the services you provide as consultancy, are you happy for me to share a link to your LinkedIn?
Yes, there's also a website, www.kgcqp.org. You'll go straight to the website there. Or, of course, Dal, they can contact you.
Yes, yeah, they could. Yeah,
I think you know my phone number by now, so we can do that.
Yeah, it's on speed dial. Brilliant, Kev. Yeah, well, thank you so much. You enjoyed the rest of your day, and yeah, we'll speak soon.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, mate. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
You're welcome. Speak soon.
A huge thank you to our special guest and to our listeners for tuning into the QP Diaries podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. As the founder of Assured Bio, we created the podcast to support our wider quality assurance community, which aligns to our dedicated offering as a recruitment agency, providing services to the pharmaceutical and biotech industry across the UK. We have over 15 years experience in the industry, exclusively focused on recruiting senior quality assurance leaders and QPs. If you want to learn more about Assured Bio's recruitment services, or if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, then please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.